Hey, how's it going? We're going to talk about tissues, animal tissues to be specific. Um, our tissue is a group of cells that have a common purpose. That's essentially what they are. And so, in the human body or in other animals, we have primarily four types of tissues, and they are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle, and nervous tissue. So these are the four types of tissues, and let's go through them one at a time. Let's start with epithelial. All right, epithelial tissue is a very common type of tissue to be discussed in anatomy, and what it essentially is a dense cell population, or in other words, tightly packed cells. So if you were to look at the cell as being kind of like somewhere like a house or something, this would be apartments, right? So these are right up on top of each other. There's no space in between them. The purpose of epithelial tissue is to cover surfaces and line organs. So, for example, your skin, right? That's covering a surface. Right? Your skin is all epithelial tissue. The inside of your cheek, the lining of your stomach, the lining of your whatever, esophagus, your eyeball, right? It's all epithelial tissue. So anything that's going to line an organ, the lining of anything, and your skin, even the lining of your blood vessels, right? All epithelial tissue. It is very often, but not always, attached to a basement membrane, which I'll show you some slides coming up. So basement membrane is just a type of connective tissue. We'll get to that. We often classify we always classify epithelial tissue by two things: by the shape of the cell and how many layers of cells there are. And that's pretty easy, because if there's one layer of cells only, we call it simple, and then if we have more than one layer, we call it stratified. So it's either going to be simple or stratified tissue, depending on how many layers we have. So already you can imagine your skin. If I were to give you a choice between simple and stratified, I hope that you would choose stratified, because there's definitely more than one layer of cells going on there in your skin, right? Otherwise you'd scratch your arm and just bleed out, right? No, there's many, many layers of squamous cells. So that's the next thing we're getting into, the cell shape. So there's three primary cell shapes. Squamous, which is, they're primarily flat cells. Cuboidal, which, as the name suggests, looks like a cube. And these cells aren't squared off or anything. It's not like actual cubes, but you just kind of have to make a judgment call. Does it look more like a box type of deal, or is it more flat? And the third one is columnar tissue, which looks like a rectangle or like a column, right? So the shapes aren't too difficult here. We have squamous cells, rather flat. Let me draw one. And then cuboidal cells, more like that's not like an actual cube, but I guess it's more like what they look like. But definitely that one's not flat, right? And then a columnar cell would be more something like that. And then you'll often, you'll see like a little nucleus in there somewhere. Something like that, right? So that's like, roughly the shape. So we can take a combination of the shape and the number of layers, and then we can just combine them. Simple squamous, stratified squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified columnar, however you want to say it, right? So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, here's one. So let's look at these cells. So I'm kind of outlining the cell right here. There's the nucleus. So often, when these cells stain, you can kind of make out the wall, and then you can make out the nucleus. So they're often stained with this. It's a stain we call H&E. So the hematoxylin stains particles like in the nucleus. Anyway, so you can see the nucleus. That's one way. That's kind of like a quick way to do it. We don't actually look at the cells. I'll just look at this layer here, and then I'll be like, okay, this is simple, right? But then, are these cells flat? Definitely not, right? So are they square, or are they more like rectangles? Well, rectangles, obviously, right? So this is simple columnar epithelial tissue. And so this tissue, you would find this tissue in your stomach lining, for example, right? So when you find columnar cells in your body, they are often secreting something or absorbing something. So this would also be the cells in your intestine, because they're absorbing things. And if you notice at the bottom, I don't know if you remember what epithelial cells are attached to. This line down here, yes, basement membrane. Okay, let's look at a different one. Okay, pretty much the same, right? Except the difference is that these cells in here are, well, what shape are they? Yeah, flat. So these are squamous. This is simple squamous tissue, right? And you would find this in your lungs, for example, right? Your lungs is a common place, because the thing is, oxygen needs to get through these cells and into your blood. So you don't want it to be stratified tissue, right? You just want one layer. And you don't want it to be thick. You want it to be the thinnest layer that you can get, right? You still need a layer between your lungs and your blood, right? But you need gas, oxygen, and carbon dioxide to get through here. Okay, anyway, let's check out one or two more. All right, this one is a little bit more difficult. So let's look at some of these cells. Well, first of all, stratified, right? More than one layer. We could definitely see that. But then it gets a little bit difficult, right? So these cells at the bottom here, if you were to classify those, what would you think they look like? Yeah, they're more like cubes, right? They're not flat. But then, and then this one up here, okay, we can say that one's more flat than a cube, right? And this one up here, okay, what about this one or that one? Well, at what point are they not flat? So how do we, well, the first answer is that, it's, is this cuboidal or squamous? Yeah, I don't know. So, but this is what we do. All right, we take the top layer. So this is called the apical surface, like the apex, the end. So this is the surface that is in the lumen. Or if this were your skin, this would be the part of the skin that you can touch, right? And then this would be, this is the basement membrane. So this is the basal surface. So you always just we would classify this tissue by the top. So I'm looking at the top here. That's a flat cell. That's a flat cell. Not so flat, but then kind of when I look at all of this, I'm going to be okay, those are rather flat-ish looking cells. So I'm going to call this whole thing stratified squamous, right? I'm ignoring down here, right? Because we're just going by what the apical surface is. But really, I just wanted to show you an example of stratified tissue. Okay, this last one's a little bit tricky. When you look at it, initially you would think that there are two layers of cells. At least I do, because what we do is we kind of look at the nuclei, right? So I'm looking here, there's one, there's the other. But this is actually considered So if you look at it, that's one cell there, and that's one cell there. So it's only a single layer, but it looks like it's stratified, so we call this pseudo-stratified. So it's pseudo-stratified columnar. So it looks like it's more than one layer, but it's actually one layer. And teachers, instructors, they like to give this one, and I don't know why. In our body, it's only found pretty much in one place. This is in your trachea, your throat, and that's it. So, but I just wanted you to know about it. All right, so let's move on to the next type of tissue. So we're done with epithelial now. So connective tissue is our next type of tissue, and if we were to go back to the housing comparison, I was saying that epithelial cells are like apartments. Well, connective tissue would be like suburban areas or rural areas. So connective tissue is tissue that contains a sparse cell population scattered through an extracellular matrix. So in other words, the cells aren't like completely on top of each other. There's space in between the cells, right? So they're not densely packed in there. And then in between each cell is an extracellular matrix. And that just means, matrix just means space, right? And extracellular just means outside the cells. So in other words, there's a bunch of cells. They're not on top of each other. There's space in between them. That's what connective tissue is. So let me give you some examples. Blood is one example, right? So there's red blood cells and there's white blood cells, and they are all floating in plasma, which is essentially water, right? So in this case, the extracellular matrix would be water or blood plasma. All right, so that's one example. Cartilage is another example. So now we're going from something that was liquid like blood to something like more of a gel or flexible like consistency. Bone is a mineralized connective tissue, right? Definitely different than blood and cartilage. It is nevertheless a type of connective tissue. There's adipose tissue, which is another word for fat tissue. And then there's dense connective tissue. And an example of dense connective tissue would be ligaments or tendons. So as you can see, connective tissue is actually quite diverse in the body. So let's look at a few slides. Actually, let's not look at a few slides. Let me talk about 3 fibers that are found in connective tissue first. All right, so these fibers are made by special cells called fibroblasts. And the 3 principal types of fibers that these cells secrete are collagen fibers, and those provide the tissue strength, but without being brittle, right? So strength with some flexibility. Elastic fibers make things elastic, right? So if we go back to thinking about your earlobe or your nose, like the cartilage, it has a lot of strength. I mean, think about the types of earrings that people get into those ears, right? So that's some strength, right? But when you twist your ear, it goes back to its shape. So also a lot of elastic fibers. So a lot of collagen in cartilage, and a lot of elastic. The third type of fibers are reticular fibers, and reticular fibers are found where you have one tissue joining another. So it could be one connective tissue joining another, or it could be like if we go back to the earlobe, or if we go to the nose, right? You have bone in your nose, you have cartilage, you have skin, it's all attached to your skin, and then there's some fat right in the corners of your nose. All those different types of tissues are being held together with reticular fibers. So those are the 3 fibers. Now let's look at a couple of slides. Okay, here's a couple slides of blood cells, and you can see the red blood cells. They're actually kind of pinkish colored. And actually here you can see the white blood cells. There's a white blood cell, there's another white blood cell. what you're seeing is like the nucleus, right? So red blood cells don't have any nucleus. The nucleus is what's staining like purple. So that it looks like there's 3 in here, right? But that's just 1. So there's a nucleus. There's another white blood cell, white blood cell. You don't see the platelets in here, but all this area right here is all the stuff they're floating in, right? So these cells aren't right up on top of each other. There's space in between each cell, right? And that's the plasma. All right, this is not the best slide at all. It's really just a photo, right? But this is what bone tissue looks like, or at least what compact bone looks like. And so you see these black these black dots. These are the those are the cells. So osteocytes, right? Those are the cells, and then all this space in between them is the mineralized connective tissue. It's the extracellular matrix. In this case of bone, as you know, it's calcium and phosphorus principally, right? And so, and then this is where the blood vessel is. But the point is that there's space in between each of these cells, right? But this is a hardened material. All right, here's some elastic, hyaline cartilage, not elastic, hyaline cartilage. You can see the cells here, they're called chondrocytes, and then all out here is the extracellular matrix, which is chondroitin sulfate, and I mean, you don't need to know it, but so this is kind of in between so actually you've got 3 types of connective tissue here. You've got bone, and then you have the hyaline cartilage in between, or it's like articulating cartilage anyway. And then this is all fluid right here, right? And then this is dense connective tissue out here. So just give you an example of what they look like. You see how they're kind of paired together sometimes, like they're paired here, they're paired here. They're actually dividing. So anyway, there's another type of connective tissue. Let's move on to muscle. All right, muscle. So we have muscle's the 3rd type of tissue, and there are 3 types of muscle, and they are all on this one slide. So we have smooth muscle, which lines your organs. So smooth muscle lines organs. For example, your small intestine, your large intestine, your stomach, your esophagus, bladder, whatever, right? So the lining of a lot of your blood vessels, your arteries, your arteries have smooth muscle. So that they're involuntary. And then down here, these are kind of, if you look at them, like if you look at a heart muscle and you look at a skeletal muscle, they look the same, like you see, similar in that you see these lines, like they have these lines in here, like darker lines, and so we call these striations. So this is skeletal muscle here, and then this is cardiac muscle. They both have striations. How they're different is that skeletal muscle is voluntary, it's attached to your skeleton. Cardiac muscle, involuntary, right? And then so here's another difference. Striated muscle can contract partly or completely, it could go at 100% or 50%. Heart muscle has to go at 100% completely. So let me show you a slide of heart muscle and you'll see why. All right, well, no luck finding a decent slide, so we're back to this, but this does kind of show us what I wanted you to see. So let's go back to the skeletal fibers, right? This is one long cell, right? Each one of these is a long cell, right? This isn't like that. So you see like this line right here and this one right here? These are called intercalated discs. So intercalated discs, they allow the action potential or the electricity that goes through your muscles, like the firing, it allows that to go from one cell, like this is one cell, here's another cell. So it allows it to go from one cell to another cell to another cell really quick. Striated muscle, they don't have that. So no intercalated disc here. This is all one cell. And, it'll go, the action potential will go through it, but it's not like so important that it all contracts at the same time. Cardiac muscle, it needs that. It has to all contract at the same time. So cardiac muscle has intercalated disc. So to kind of summarize really quick, striated muscle is skeletal muscle. It's voluntary. Cardiac muscle, involuntary. They have intercalated discs. It's just the heart. Smooth muscle looks a little different here, right? These fibers are a lot smoother, but smooth muscle, involuntary, you find it in the lining of your organs and some blood vessels. So let's look at the last one. All right, nervous tissue. So nervous tissues are made from neuron. So a neuron is the functional unit of nervous tissue. And so this is a neuron, and there's a few parts to it. This is the cell body, right? And then you see all these things projecting from it. So these are dendrites. And so the signal, if you follow the arrow, the signal's coming from another neuron, like from the axon of another neuron, and here it comes down here, and then it's going to go, that action potential, that electrical signal is going to go into the dendrite, through the cell body, out the axon is going away from the cell, and then it gets to a synapse here. Like you see all these white dots, that's supposed to represent like actually a gap. There's supposed to be a gap here. So, and it jumps across. So in this case, it's stimulating muscle to contract. But if there was another neuron here in this area, it would like jump across the synapse, like the space, and go to the next. Like right here, this is a synapse where I'm pointing, right? And then right, up off the screen on the top here is an axon. And then the electrical impulse jumps across and goes to the next one. And then it comes across, jumps across, goes to the next one, and goes across. So, anyway, what you need to know about this, nervous tissue are made from neurons. They have three main parts: dendrites, which receive the action potential or electrical signal, however you want to think of it, cell body, and then the axon transmits this signal to the next neuron, or in this case, in this photo, it's going straight to the muscle, and it's going to make this muscle contract. So that's about it for the four types of tissue found in animals.